Less than half of marketers say they collect enough data to actually be able to act upon it. And that's a big disconnect, right? Marketers recognize the opportunity, but do they have enough data? Do they have the right information to actually make that happen? No.
You're listening to the Content 10x podcast, where it's all about content repurposing. I'm Amy Woods, and I'm here to help you maximize your content and find smart ways to get your message in front of more of the right people, whilst also saving time. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Content 10x podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and in this episode, I am super excited to be talking to the brilliant Zontee Hou. Zontee is a digital marketing consultant, speaker, and author. She's the managing director of our fantastic client Convince and Convert, and the author of the book Data-Driven Personalization. She's also the host of the podcast Data-Driven Decisions, which we're delighted to be working on with her. In this episode, we cover the different types of marketing data and how it can be collected. We also talk about what it means to have a more personalised approach to data, the common pitfalls companies face when relying too heavily on data to inform decisions, and what B2B marketers should focus on when considering data in their decision making. Plus, she also shares some great real-life examples of how data has helped companies really connect with their audiences. It's a fantastic conversation, so let's dive in. Zontee, welcome to the Content 10x podcast.
Thanks so much, Amy. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm very happy that you're here as well, so thank you for your time. Now, congratulations on your new book, Data-Driven Personalization, and of course, your new podcast, Data-Driven Decisions, which we're delighted to be supporting you with. Your book and your podcast and the whole topic of data and data-driven decisions, personalization, is really interesting for the listeners of this show, who many are marketers in organizations, large and small, leading marketing, working within the teams, and also some business owners as well. So it's a topic that I know is going to be super, super interesting. The first question I have is, why a book specifically on data and why now?
Absolutely. I think that in the last 10 years of working with different kinds of marketing and business leaders, one of the things that I hear all the time is we want to build a competitive advantage. We want to stand out from the crowd, and we want to reach our customers in a way that's highly relevant and impactful, right? Well, the truth is that the research shows us that customers' expectations is for a more highly personalized, relevant experience that does not waste their time. You and I have both experienced this as consumers, both on the B2B and B2C side, right? If somebody sends you a LinkedIn message and it doesn't have relevance to what it is that you do, you feel like, boy, why did they waste my time with this message? On the B2C side, if you see an advertisement that is not relevant because it's not well targeted, you feel like, oof, that's a mistake. This is the world that we live in. And so to deliver on that experience, marketers really need to use the data that they have access to, both first party and third party, to do a better job. But oftentimes marketers and the decision makers within the marketing communication space don't actually have a seat when it comes to how organizations collect data, implement the analysis of the data, and then they're therefore at a handicap when it comes to how they can actually use that data. So the book is really about building a strategy for data-driven personalization, but also making sure that you as a marketing leader, a communications leader, have a strong role in the shaping of that strategy and the ownership of how data is collected, what data is collected, and who has access to the analysis, so that you can do a better job on actually making a better customer experience, marketing experience for the people that you serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are the types of marketing data? So what are the key kind of types and categories that we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. In the book, I talk about 9 different categories. Of course, you have the basic things like demographics and customer relationship data. I'm also encouraging people to really think through their behavioral data. So, how do your customers behave within not only their buying journey, but the industry at large that you work within? So, I share some examples in the book, for instance, of shoe brands, right? Understanding how often people walk. How do they use your shoes? How much do they exercise? Do they live in a city? Do they live in the country? There's a lot of different parameters that actually impact your usage of shoes, right? So behavioral data is very important. Psychographic data. So what are the attitudes, right? Somebody who is extremely price oriented is very different from somebody who is prestige oriented, really understanding how they make those decisions. I also talk about things like technographic data, which oftentimes people don't really discuss, but is very important. So technographic data means what kind of a tech stack does your customer use? And that can be really relevant in many different industries. On the B2B side, of course, any kind of a software platform or hardware device, they're going to want to know what's the environment in which you're using this, right? Many of us use software as service platforms that integrate with all the other tools, right? So we really have to understand what that ecosystem is. But again, on the B2C side, you can think about, let's say, video game players, right? Are they using a PS2? Are they using, oh, I'm so old, I just said PS2. What are they on? PS5, PS6?
Think
I
so,
don't know.
yeah, 5, I think.
Sure. So are they using that? Are they using an Xbox? What kind of headphones do they use? What kind of ancillary devices, right? All of that actually matters in, again, many different industries to better personalize the experience that you're delivering to them. Even understanding for most of us, are we on a Mac or a PC or an iPhone or an Android when they hit your website? That information actually can help you to improve the experience. But if you're not collecting that data as part of your consideration set, then you're missing out on those opportunities. And of course, we have to talk about consent and privacy data, right? What are our customers' preferences for information that they receive? And in the book, I talk about that as more than just, do I want to receive communications in what channels, but even giving them power of control over topical decisions, right? I share in the book that there are several different retail brands, including K Jewelers and Levi's jeans. They have given people the ability to opt out of communications about Mother's Day. Why, you might say? Because Mother's Day is a very sensitive time of year for some of us who have lost a mother or who may have a bad relationship with our mother or who want to become mothers, right? There's a lot of different touch points. And they are actually recognizing that this is a place where by empowering their audience to say, yes, I do want this, no, I don't want this, they can have a stronger, more thoughtful, more trustworthy relationship with their customers because they're empowering those people to make those decisions. So when we talk about data, there are so many different categories. I think the key thing to figure out is, again, what is most impactful to your customer in their journey, in your industry, in your space? What do you need to be delivering the right experience? But also, what don't you need? I think that it can be just as creepy for people to have too much information about us when it's not relevant to the experience that we have with that particular brand. And I share some examples in the book of some missteps that brands have made where they collected data, and when people noticed that they had this information, it felt jarring or kind of overly assertive to have that information. And so we really have to think through, how can we find that right balance, and again, provide transparency and provide control to our audiences.
In terms of all those different types of data that you talked about, a big question I have is the how, I guess, in terms of, how do you get hold of that relevant data? And are some of those types quite a bit more difficult to get hold of than others? I
Sure.
guess they are, aren't they?
Sure. One thing that I tell people all the time is that while it can feel daunting to collect data, oftentimes it is as simple as asking, right? That we give our customers different touch points to give us this information. There are some websites, for instance, banking websites or software websites, where every time you log into your account, they've got one single question in the top right corner or in the top left corner, and they're consistently building up additional information about you so that they can better serve you in the future. You and I have probably shopped websites where it says, do you want more these recommendations, yes or no, right? That's an opportunity to collect data. So the collection of data is really about the asking of questions. I tell brands that it's very important to think through how can we integrate survey data as well as research into our overall collection of information. And then once we have kind of the broad picture of what our customers want, then you can start asking individual customers that one-to-one information of, we think that there are oftentimes these three categories of people. Which one are you, right? So I'll give you an example of a campaign that we worked on some years ago. Texas X's is the largest alumni association in the United States. It is associated with the University of Texas. They have a huge community of people who've graduated from that university system. And of course, Texas is a very large state, it's a very large system, so tons and tons of people. We worked with them to develop attitudinal research and understand what are the drivers, what are the motivations of the people who are alumni and what do they care about. And what was interesting was prior to this research, they had taken an approach of segmenting their audience by age. You know, are you 5 years out of college? Are you 30 years out of college? They thought those were the things that really impacted your decision making process. But in fact, when we did the research, we found that no, there were three groups of attitudes that were shared. And whether you were 5 years out or 60 years out, you might care about the network and the value of the community, or you might care about the camaraderie and the social piece of it, or you might care about prestige and the value of your degree and the perception of that degree out in the world. So it didn't matter what age you were, you had these kind of big groups of people who had these shared attitudes. And by identifying that as the main drivers through, right, we recommended to them, hey, you have this opportunity to now share with your audience which questions help to determine which group they fall into. And so it was really easy to say, you could have something as simple as an email automation series, right? That says, are you more interested in career and connection? Are you more interested in sports and camaraderie? Are you more interested in understanding the advancing research of our organization? And just let people pick the path that makes the most sense for them, and immediately you have more information about them. If you don't have enough of this information and you're not able to collect as much of it in the short term as you would like, of course, you can also leverage third-party data. There are now a variety of tools that are pulling from third-party data sources that you can then use to serve more personalized content to your audience, whether it's through email or through your website or through your app. And they are essentially an experimentation layer that just simply determines based on their past behaviors on other third-party sites and through, again, this demographic psychographic data that's been collected elsewhere, what might be most relevant to them. So you don't necessarily have to have all the data yourself in order to use data that exists.
That's so interesting. And I guess for the marketing teams who are getting hold of all of this information, all of this data, and then they're empowered to create way more personalized marketing campaigns and outreach and things like that. Something that I was thinking is that, I guess, from the marketing team's perspective, if you have all of these different sets then of people, we'll kind of classify these people who've answered and provided data in a certain way to be marketed in that way. And then these guys are going to prefer this way and so on. Does a data-led marketing approach lead to a different way of managing your marketing? So moving away from, say, product-led marketing very much to customer-led marketing and more campaign-driven? Because I'm thinking whether marketing teams will then be juggling quite a lot of different campaigns and how that works, as you're categorizing and learning from the data and being personalized with your approach.
Sure. I mean, I think that one of the challenges that you're alluding to is that it can be difficult to scale a wide variety of personalization if you don't have the right tools in place to automate and prioritize some of that work, right? There's two things that I think that teams need to think about. First is, I am not suggesting that you highly personalize every single communication to every kind of customer necessarily. In the book, I talk a lot about how do you identify your most valuable customers, the ones who are going to move the needle the most for you. In order to spend our limited time and resources in the right places, I think it's very important that part of the segmentation work that you're doing is identifying what are the behaviors that we really need to target because they have high value results. In the book, I share an example from the American big box store brand Target, where the marketing team identified that if they could win over pregnant women in their first trimester before they had made the announcement public, and therefore all brands who purchased that data had that information, they could win over their loyalty and build habits that would make them loyal throughout not only their pregnancy, but hopefully the life of the child, right? And they decided if that's what we're going to aim for, we need to work with our data analytics team to identify women in the first trimester again before they had put their hand up. It took their data analytics team 6, 8 months to run a bunch of different scenarios and figure out how to create that segment. But once they found it, and they determined it through things like suddenly switching to unscented hand cream and stopping buying certain things and starting to buy vitamins, right? If you've ever had a child, you can kind of recognize those behaviors. Those are things you probably did yourself. They identified those behaviors and they were able to create the segment. And it was extremely accurate. They were able to target people very early on with marketing messaging before other people knew about them and really impact their shopping behaviors. And this was in 2002. Now more than 20 years on, it continues to be a really big part of their business. And it makes sense, right? Because once you build those habits, people continue to shop there. I myself, when my daughter was, a newborn, I shopped at Target because I had built those behaviors. And so I think what we need to identify is who are the audience segments that we really need to win over. Once you do that, you could, of course, take a campaign-driven approach. You can see how in this example, right, we're really talking specifically about women in the first trimester. So that's a campaign series. But then again, at scale, if there are other places where we want to identify additional work to be done, I think you have to implement tools that allow you to deliver personalized messaging based on a whole bunch of rules, machine learning, and automated delivery. And again, tools like Optimizely, like Persado, various email platforms where you can do a lot of really great rule-based block delivery of content. Those are really good opportunities for us to create a lot of individual personalization at scale.
Hey, just a little break from this podcast episode to ask you a question. Would you like one single place that you can go to that provides you with everything you need to be able to implement the best practices in content repurposing for your video content, your podcast episodes, and your social media content today? To help you get more value from the content that you create, get more time back, and help you reach more people than you ever thought possible. If so, then you are going to love the Content 10x Toolkit. The toolkit is full of video tutorials, templates, checklists, swipe files, step-by-step guides and more that shows you how to repurpose your content in the best ways possible today. No more Googling, no more figuring it out yourself. We provide you with everything that you need to become a content repurposing pro. If this sounds like something that would interest you, then go check out the Content 10x Toolkit at content10x.com/toolkit. Okay, and back to this week's episode. I guess you mentioned earlier already that, a problem often can be, it's not like the lack of data or how to find the data, but it's actually swimming in too much data and working out what is the most important data. So I imagine there's plenty of tools, AI and machine learning, etc., to help you make those decisions. AI is nothing new, but it's become a huge topic ever since ChatGPT, etc. But language learning models and machine learning has been part of the data world for a very long time, hasn't it? But how have you seen things change within marketing teams as you've been working with them around AI and trying to
Sure.
get a grip on data?
One of the things that I'm most excited about is actually how the explosion of interest in the last 2 years, like you said, this is nothing new, but the last 2 years has really accelerated the speed of innovation in the large language model and AI space. And what you're seeing is that it's becoming less expensive than ever and more available than ever to teams, right? So it means that, again, even small business teams can start to use things like ChatGPT or Claude on top of the data that they actually have and use natural language queries to find out information from the data that they have. I think that this gives teams the ability to move more quickly, which is very exciting. You don't need to be a team like Target with an entire data analytics department and 6 to 8 months to spend on a project like this. You can ask a couple of questions. You could even do something like, you know, find all of the customers who have raised their hand and said that they're pregnant. Look back 3 months or 6 months to the beginning of their pregnancy. What were they purchasing at that time? Now find us a segment that looks exactly like that now, right? You could do that in 3 queries. So it's much easier to process that information. I also think it's really about building a culture in which everybody is empowered to ask the right questions, because you can see that in the Target example, it is that the marketing team identified that this was an opportunity. And then they asked, could we find this data? It did not start with, hey, let's look at the data and just mine it and come up with something from the data. That's not very telling. And like you said, there's too much of it. So you could see a whole bunch of patterns, but they might not actually be impactful from a decision-making perspective. I really think that it's important for teams and organizations to identify, how do we create an environment in which people come to the table with hypotheses when it comes to marketing strategy or business strategy, and then we empower them to ask those questions and see if we can pull out that information from our data, because that allows us to not only ask more compelling questions, but it also allows us to create more valuable segments, as we've been talking about, where we want to spend our time and energy.
100% agree. Are there some common pitfalls that companies face when they perhaps rely a little bit too much on data for future decision making? Have you seen any, just some pitfalls of over reliance, so to speak?
Sure. Well, I think that it comes from that space that we were just talking about, where people go to the data first without having strong hypotheses, because sometimes you have a whole bunch of correlations and they exist, but are they telling? Do they allow you to make better decisions? Do they improve your customer experiences? If you're just saying, well, we've got 1,000 people who do X behavior, but that 1,000 people aren't particularly significant in any way, shape, or form, or that behavior is in fact just a byproduct of something that already exists and is determinative, why bother going after that particular group of people, right? So I think we do have to, again, from that strategic point of view, say, who are the people that really move the needle for us? What matters from a strategy perspective in terms of who we want to go after? And then look at the data as a method to achieve those strategic and business goals. If you just say there are numbers that back this up, but it doesn't have a good explanation, it doesn't have clear value, then the numbers in of themselves are not particularly valuable, right? The other mistake that I think I see a lot is that organizations will look at this challenge and they say, well, we understand that data-driven personalization would make a difference in our business. In fact, I did research specifically for the book, and we found that 98% of marketers agree with that statement, that they do believe that data-driven personalization would give them a competitive advantage. 4 out of 5 of them agreed with it very much. So it's not that there's disagreement about the value of this work. It's that oftentimes organizations look at that and they go, but we don't want to invest because we think that other players in our space aren't doing a very good job either, or we're just not a very mature industry. So this isn't something that we have to really think about. But you're not competing in customer experience with other people in your industry. If you're in financial services, if you're in healthcare, if you're in some other spaces, it can feel like it's a very immature space. It's very old fashioned, right? But your customers' experiences are of brands like Target and Nike and Amazon and Netflix, where the level of personalization is already extremely high. They live in that world. They don't want less from you. They want significantly more from you. So I think understanding what matters to the customers, that's another major pitfall. And as I mentioned, I think that oftentimes organizations, they fail to invest in the right spaces. And one of the key projects for a data driven approach is, of course, to unify your data. And organizations will say it is so daunting, it is so scary, it's so difficult for us to figure out our data soup. We have lots of data from over the years. It's messy, it's unclean, meaning a lot of the information are not cohesive, they're not in the right fields, et cetera, et cetera. We're just going to look the other way. But quite frankly, that's like the equivalent of a person who has been hoarding for years in their house, and they say, you know what, I can't clean the house because it's just too far gone. Well, then you're going to continue living in the mess, right? Sooner or later, you have to stop and say, let's make this a project. Let's put together a task force within our organization and let's invest time and energy into it. Because if we don't start today, then we'll never start. And yes, you might say, I'm going to start today and it's going to take us 2 years. We have clients, I have a client in the logistics space for whom that's exactly what the data lake project has been like. They started last year and they said, it's going to take us 2 years to get it done. But at least they started it, because you have to organize your data, you have to clean it up, and you have to figure out what do we want out of it so that we can make good business decisions, marketing decisions, sales decisions, customer experience decisions. That's the opportunity that's at hand.
Yeah, it's like basically it's sitting on a gold mine in a way, isn't it, of opportunity. But if you don't tidy it up and you just keep letting it get messy, you are just not going to benefit from that gold mine. Do companies often end up bringing in some external data specialists if their data's in quite a muddle to manage these data cleansing programs for them and get things into a good place?
They do. And I think that it is worthwhile because, of course, somebody who's an expert in that kind of activity, they have a lot of experience. They've seen lots of the challenges. And I think that they're also going to ask the right questions in terms of what do you want out of the data to help you make good decisions. Like I said, the goal is not to collect all data. You may find that there is some data that you want to get rid of because it is not serving you and it clutters the picture. And so I think it's helping to make heads or tails of what you have and what you have available, and where are the gaps, and also what are the connections that we need to make through our data stack in order to make this data usable. So I do think that an external resource can be really helpful in that situation. I also think recognizing, again, where are those gaps can help you make better decisions in terms of other data providers or partners, because sometimes those are spaces where there are existing tools out there that you can leverage without making more work for your team, right? So if you find, for instance, we have good individualized information on certain kinds of accounts, but what we need is to better understand the people within this particular industry. There are a lot of people who are providing industry data and geo-targeted data for B2B organizations. They don't pass the data through, right? It's you're using a data layer on top of your tool. It meets standards of privacy, et cetera, but it allows you to deliver a better, more personalized experience, leveraging both your information and their information. And so that can drastically improve the functionality of your website or your email or your app or your lead generation work. And I think that those are really great opportunities for marketers.
It makes me laugh really when you said that, and I think you said 90% of people said that they recognize that data driven personalization is a massive benefit. But then there was like a lower, what was the percentage that said they actually do it? That was lower, wasn't it? It was,
Yeah, that's
did you
right.
say?
So less than half of marketers say they collect enough data to actually be able to act upon it. And that's a big disconnect, right? Marketers recognize the opportunity, but do they have enough data? Do they have the right information to actually make that happen? No. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is that that's actually a blue ocean opportunity, right? There are a lot of people who are not yet delivering on this high, high, high expectation from customers. In fact, we found only about 40% of the marketers surveyed are personalizing their website or personalizing their targeted social media or paid digital campaigns. Only 40%. And I think that that demonstrates that there's a big portion of the market that knows this is important, but they don't act on it.
It's like my world of content repurposing, where nearly every marketing department says that repurposing is really important, but then pretty much all of them say, no, we don't actually do it enough. It's funny. It's a disconnect between, like importance and values and actual actions, isn't it? What's the most fun, creative example that you've unleashed through your, research, etc., of really personalized marketing campaign, like just something that was just like, oh, that is so clever, that's so fun?
Sure. One of the examples that I share is actually of Spotify's year-end campaign. When that first came out, you saw it all over your social media platforms, right? Because every person got a roundup of their listening habits, what it said about them, what artists they favored, what kinds of genres they favored. It was really engaging, but it also built this very personal picture of your identity as a music aficionado. And people wanted to share that online. Why? Because that reflection of them felt not only meaningful, but also very telling. And people like to share things about themselves. And this was a campaign that was extremely successful on an organic level. But of course, they did have paid activations against it. They had billboards, they had all sorts of things. Why? Because they recognized that music is so intrinsically tied to our identities, and we actually often are proud of that identity and we want to tell that story. And I think that this is a great example of how there is a community aspect to personalization that we can actually activate, that oftentimes people want to share what is true about them, and brands should take advantage of that, that there is an opportunity to have people participate in the information that we are actually sharing out into the world. And so for me, Spotify is a really fun example. Another example that I talk about in the book is Lego, that they actually use their community to not only collect ideas for new parts, new sets, new themes, because they have this really active community of people who are interested in the, of course, Lego building world. But they've also identified that those are people who are going to be evangelists for the brand, right? So by making sure that they are actually collecting that information about them and then engaging with those people as these really high value brand ambassadors, organic brand ambassadors, they're able to give them a first look at things. They're able to survey them for feedback. They're able to use them as a testing ground for ideas. And they give the benefits of insider status to those people, but they're also using them as a laboratory for experimentation. And I think that that's also a really fun example, but that demonstrates the two-way experience that can happen when you're actually thoughtfully using your customer relationship as a space to collect data, but learn. And I think ultimately that's what data collection should be about, right? I say in the book, data-driven personalization has the word personalization in it because it's ultimately about the people. If you're not using your data to serve your customers and to serve their needs and their drivers, then ultimately you're losing sight of what's powerful here. It's the people piece.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's just been so insightful talking to you about this and really just thinking about the power of data and what data can do. One final question. What would you say is a really overlooked either data point or piece of data that marketers just don't pay enough attention to, that you think actually deserves more attention and more credit and could really help marketers?
Well, I shared it before, but I'll say it again. I think it's this idea of letting people opt in and out of different kinds of communication, right? A couple of years ago, I think we all experienced that incident where Facebook, Meta, they had to, due to a variety of different legal cases, allow you to see how they had tagged your account on the back end, right? What are your preferences for their advertising targeting? And at the time, me, like many other marketers, my colleague Daniel Lemon and I actually had a great conversation about this. Daniel hosts our Social Pros podcast. Went in and we looked at what information they had about us, and we untagged the things that were wrong. I think Daniel said he might have untagged himself from everything. I did not go that far because I actually want my ads to be personalized. I would rather receive advertising that's highly relevant to me, right? I'm in the 88% of people that we surveyed who said, yes, I do want more personalized communications. Looking at that information told me a lot about what behaviors Facebook had tracked, right? It had noted, of course, the things that I buy normally, what kinds of clothing I like, but it had also noted things like at the time I didn't have a child and I had just shopped for my good friend's son. And so it had said like interested in children's toy. So I untagged that, right? Because for me, that was actually, it was a one-off. I didn't need additional advertising or messaging or content delivered to me based on that. But it made me feel A, more empowered, and B, it made me feel more in control of my experience. Even now, when advertisers like YouTube say, do you want more of ads like this? Do you want less of ads like this? I actually like to respond to that because I do feel like it improves my experience. So I think do not take for granted that your customers would rather have a more personalized experience and would look at things like that, would look at the categories that you provide them. And that's better for your company and it's better for them, right? Because it allows you to have more accurate data. So I think that we often overlook this idea of feedback as part of the data collection process, but in fact, it builds trust. PwC just published a report very recently, and they found that when you are transparent with the utilization of data, it does build trustworthiness, and trustworthiness increases the relationship between the customer and the brand. No surprise there, but I think the research is helpful to back it up. And I think that it is finding these opportunities to say, how do we have a better relationship with our customers through data, through information that we as marketers should continue to look out for and leverage so that we can be more effective.
I'd never really completely thought about it from that perspective of how I'm the same as you. I'd rather just control my experience and provide the useful information that means that I get marketed at correctly. We will be marketed at, so we might as well get things that are potentially useful to us and that kind of thing. So that's really interesting. People are more willing to participate in this game if the data is used in a transparent and fair and the way that it was intended for to begin with. Then that's really interesting. So that's great. Well, thank you so much, Zontee. I mean, clearly everybody needs to just go grab a copy of your book to find out more, because this is a very short conversation in the grand scheme of how much time you've put into this and everything that you know. So go grab a copy, Data-Driven Personalization. I will put the link in the show notes so you can go grab that, and also tune into the podcast as well, Data Driven Decisions, because that's an excellent show and digs into this in a lot more detail with so many more examples and case studies. Fantastic. Anything else you'd like people to do, Zontee? Where would you like people to connect with you and let you know that they heard the episode?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for giving a shout out to the podcast and the book. You can go to codeandpage.com/data-driven personalization to pick up a copy of the book. And there's free shipping in the US and the UK. So please do check that out. You can also sign up for our fantastic blog and newsletter at convinceandconvert.com. And we are constantly putting out new resources for the marketing community. So I hope that you'll join us there.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, we'll put notes to everything. Highly recommend anything that Convince and Convert do. So yeah, big fans. Well, thank you, Zontee. Really appreciate your time. I'm sure everyone listening is very appreciative and interested in this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that discussion and thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoy the Content 10x podcast, then why not hit that subscribe button on your podcast listening app of choice so that you can get updated when new episodes are released. And I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a review as well. That really makes a difference for the podcast. Also, please do get a copy of my book, Content 10x, More Content, Less Time, Maximum Results. It is the ultimate guide to repurposing every type of content, and it's available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback and also in audiobook as well. And you can head to content10x.com/book to find all the other places that you can get a copy of my book. And if you would like us to do your content repurposing for you, then we offer a fully end-to-end done for you content repurposing service. This is for podcasters and video content creators. We have our Podcast 10x video SEO 10x, and also our specific LinkedIn 10x service, helping you to become the leading authority in your industry on LinkedIn. You can find out so much more about our services on our website. And also, please do give me a follow on the social media platforms. I share lots and lots of tips and advice on social media about content repurposing. I'm at Content 10x on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And if you try content10x.com/LinkedIn, you'll find my LinkedIn profile over there as well. All that's left to say is thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.